Hi, I'm Natalie Arney, and this is SEO in 2024.
Natalie, what's your number one SEO tip for 2024?
So my number one SEO tip for 2024 is don't neglect the power of reducing, reusing, and recycling content that already exists. This doesn't mean just content on your site, but any kind of content that you've produced.
Okay, the 3 R's, they're easy to remember.
Yeah.
So are they all part of the same thing, or are they different things that are applied to different pieces of content depending on what needs to be done?
So I would say that it really does vary. Some ways that you could potentially look at it is thinking about on your traditional kind of content audit and thinking about content decay. Now, a lot of people do talk about content decay, and people think about whether to remove or repurpose content when you're using a content audit template. So there's lots of content templates, auditing templates out there. And it's like keep, remove, reuse, etc. And this is the kind of steps that you could take. But we're looking at not just the content audit itself, but we're also looking at other things around it. It's aimed at kind of all different kinds of businesses, and it can be applicable to you, whether you're seeing the signs and impact of content decay already, whether you've been hit by a helpful content audit or a content quality audit, or you're worried about either of them, or just that you want to gain a competitive advantage over your competition.
Brilliant. Okay. So it'd be great to dive into just specifically how to determine what needs to be done. So maybe starting off with reducing. So how do you go and check out a piece of content and actually decide, well, this piece of content needs to be reduced from X number of words to X number of words?
So I would say with reducing, it's more about whether you want to remove the content altogether rather than kind of shortening it. Obviously, when you're auditing content as well, I mean, even now there are some pieces of content on the web that are very long guides that might be better off split into separate articles, for example. So if you're creating a really long guide, potentially it might have been created as a piece of skyscraper content for link acquisition, or just to try and rank for as many keywords as you can. Obviously, we know here that intent is so important now, and making sure that intent of a piece of content is key. Sometimes, if you've got a massive piece of content, it might be confusing not just for Google, but also for the user of what the intent of the content is, especially if things like the H1 and the heading don't align with what is actually covered in the article. So looking at what is covered in that piece and thinking, okay, what do I want the intent for this piece of content to be? And also, does everything in this article meet or fulfill that intent? If it doesn't, are there ways that we can then break this content down into separate pieces of content that all fulfill that intent? Or not fulfill that intent, fulfill their own intent, I would say. So say, for example, you've got something that's more kind of top level, or whether someone's looking for something at the top of the funnel and they're looking for more informative and educational content, but you've got a lot of kind of more conversion-led content on that page. It's having to think about, okay, do I need to have this piece of content as a more educational thing with some clear calls to action for conversion points, and then create a separate, more conversion-led piece for the user to then approach when they're at the bottom of the funnel? Because obviously the user that's going to be hitting your site might not be at any stage. Yeah, they could be at different stages. They might come back to your website. They might not ever come back to your website. But what you need to do is you need to make sure that the intent of that content is aligned. I would say that would be the first thing to have a look at, and see whether you can either split that piece of content up or whether you can obviously refresh it.
Okay, so it certainly seems to be primarily focused on users. So does that mean that you won't do things like look at whether the URL is indexed on the search engines, or whether that page gets any traffic, or whether it has any backlinks? That's not really part of your decision-making process, is it?
So that would be part of it. So if I go through some of the steps that people can do to implement it, so obviously looking to see whether this content needs to be refreshed or not. Content audits are key. So there's loads of different templates out there that you can use. You'll have ones that are, say, your agency side. You might be able to use a template that's a standard one in your agency. You might be able to get some from different sources across the internet and tweak and make your own, which is what I do. And while you're doing this, it's making sure that you don't just look at search content, you look at search and social content, and then also look at search and social stats, allowing you to then pick and prioritize what you want to or what you don't want to optimize and keep. And then you're looking at, okay, how much traffic is this number one? Should this piece of content be indexed or not? Is it indexed or not? How much traffic is it getting? How many keywords does it rank for? How many shares on social has it had? Has it got any traffic from other sources? So say, for example, email, and then also looking at things like, has this piece of content acquired any backlinks? And then on top of your content audit, you may also want to analyze the content for EEAT. And again, there's some really good templates out there. Aleda Solis is one, fantastic. And making sure that content the existing content, but any new content meets those EEAT guidelines. So it's things like making sure you've got quotes in it. Look at what your competitors are doing and do better than them. Adding in your own business insight, etc. Those are the kinds of things that are included in those kinds of EEAT templates. But it's really key to have a look at how this current content is performing. So if it's not indexed, it might not be indexed, but it might be getting some social traffic. So first of all, number one, that gives you an insight into, okay, this content is helpful, but at the same time, there might be an additional issue about why it isn't in Google. So it might be, for example, it accidentally has no index on it. Or it might be, for example, that piece of content is missing something key that all of your competitors offer, but you don't. And it's obviously down to you to figure out, okay, how am I going to get this content indexed? How am I going to provide value to it? And then go from there. But yeah, definitely content audits and EEAT contents are key here.
And in terms of determining whether or not that piece of content provides value to your user, is comparing it against EEAT guidelines the way to go to determine that?
I would say partly. I think there's a lot of additional things that you need to consider here, especially if you are in a business where you've got, say, a customer service department or a customer support department, and making sure that obviously there's value to get from there as well. But it's really, really important to obviously make sure that it does. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. Obviously, adding in your own insights, making sure that if you speak about a study, for example, and you don't link to it, make sure that you link to that study. There's simple little things that you can be doing to just make sure that you're supporting what you're saying. It's almost going back to university and someone going in and marking an essay and saying, where did you get this information from? It's like, well, actually, I got this information from this study. So there's something at the moment, obviously a lot of people are talking about LLMs, and a phrase that I use and people are asking me about is about how LLMs are stochastic parrot. And a couple of people are like, oh, this is from you. And I said, no. This Emily M. Bender has written a fantastic article about it. And she actually kind of she invented this phrase. And obviously I then link them to the article that she's written and anything supported. And again, it's just making sure that whatever you say is supported, and not just obviously linking to things, but bringing in quotes from authoritative sources like someone in your business or like an external person of interest.
So a stochastic parrot is a large language model that's good at generating convincing language, but does not actually understand the meaning of the language it's processing.
Yeah, that's it. And again, it's thinking about, obviously, a lot of people, and a really fantastic talk from Brighton SEO was about providing value and how to keep the human element in using AI for content marketing. It was by Teresa Litzer. And again, it's kind of, when we're talking about good quality, helpful content with a massive, the influx, the deluge of lots and lots of LLM generated content that we're seeing flooding the internet at the moment, looking and seeing, okay, even if we do create that content with an LLM, with ChatGPT or Bard or however you want to create that, or Jasper, however you want to create that content, how do you provide that human value onto that piece of content? Yeah, it's all about, at the end of the day, does your content provide value? Does it meet intent? Is it quality? And that's not just from a SEO standpoint, but thinking about it being shared across multiple channels. One of the questions I always seem to ask people is, how can I tell if a piece of content is good quality or good enough quality? Would you be confident in sharing that piece of content on your LinkedIn profile or your CEO's LinkedIn profile? And then going from there and having a go, well, why? And it's cross-channel. It's not just obviously from an SEO thing. We're looking at content serving not just SEO, but looking at beyond SEO.
So how often do you review your content? Is this something that can be done once a year and then forgotten about until next year?
I hate to say the phrase, it depends. But I've worked for lots and lots of different businesses, and most of them, what I do building to a workflow is making sure that at least once a year we do look at content and see, okay, has this piece of content been refreshed this year? If not, let's have a look and see whether it does need refreshing. Obviously, refreshing a piece of content doesn't mean changing a date on a piece of content, and obviously Google are clamping down on that because obviously there's a lot, people have been getting away with that for too long. But again, looking at things like search trends, looking at different phrases that have changed, look at social trends, and there's lots and lots of different ways that you can use to obviously refresh that content. So I would say look on it on a yearly basis, but also have a look at trends related to your business or to your niche, and make sure that if there's been an increase or a change in those, using tools such as Google Trends, Exploding Topics, tools like Also Asked as well, to look at how people also ask questions and queries have changed. Using those tools and seeing how people are talking about your niche or that specific topic that article was about, and say, right, okay, people are now talking, or there's been a search increase or a demand increase in a specific area. I need to be at least adding a paragraph on that and the heading on that in my article and building it into my article and really kind of providing that extra value so that you're not left behind.
It seems like a lot of work to review and update lots of content. I'm sure it's quite worthwhile, but is it ever worthwhile just as a content publishing strategy just to focus on evergreen content? So hopefully you never actually have to update it, or is that actually perhaps detrimental to your content success because your articles are perhaps older on average?
I would say even, evergreen content should be refreshed because obviously things change. For example, if you were creating an evergreen content piece about what is SEO, for example, SEO changes a lot, and that people would say, okay, well, having a piece of content explaining what SEO is should be created like a few years ago, and then it should continue to happen. But obviously, because of the competitive landscape, because of searchers' needs and the change in the search landscape, even the content that you think is more evergreen should be refreshed. I would say that obviously, even I guess it's a quotable thing that even evergreen content suffers from content decay because it's such a dynamic world. Your competitors are always going to be looking at you. So, for example, if you're looking at bigger players in the financial publishing space, so if we were looking at NerdWallet, for example, they still continue to update their kind of evergreen guides because of that. Obviously, not everyone's got the budget of them or the SEO focus on them. So it's making sure that you prioritize the correct pieces of content and what provides value. If you see any kind of decreases in traffic, decreases in rankings, or that you see specific pieces that have been affected by any kind of update, then obviously I'd recommend focusing on those and then looking and seeing in terms of prioritization. Have a think about obviously what your business aims are for this year or what your client's business aims are for that year as well, and taking those pieces of content and prioritizing those. So looking at traffic, looking at rankings, and also looking at business priorities, and then working on additional pieces. But I would prioritize those things first.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time doing what you suggest in 2024?
So I would say to stop putting out rushed, poor quality content that provides little to no value and focus on what provides value. So not just from an SEO standpoint, but about the content being shared across multiple channels. Instead of putting out 5 short, unresearched, poor quality pieces of content that provide little to no kind of, they don't fulfill any search intent. They don't answer the searcher's questions. They're not going to rank well. Instead of reduce that to 1 to 2 pieces and produce some really great quality pieces of content, rather than feeling as though you're rushing out poor quality content just to tick boxes.
Natalie Arney is a freelance SEO consultant. You can find her over at nataliearney.com. Natalie, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2024.
Thanks for having me, David.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2024, the book, over at seoin2024.com.